Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with a ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be returning and taking another look at the Thrasher Fleet issue, and we're going to be doing this for a number of different reasons. Firstly, because I have the Halarange skin for it, and damn it if I wasn't going to find any excuse possible to showcase this in a video. Secondly, because a lot of you have mentioned that you find destroyers to be this really underpowered, unusual ship class that you think is useless in EVE Echoes, and that's simply not the case. Yes, I agree there needs to be some work done bringing destroyers into line with cruisers and frigates, but certainly there are some still very powerful destroyers out there that you can have a lot of fun with. And thirdly, of course, the Thrasher Fleet issue, as I'm sure many of you know, is one of my most famous ships, it's one of my most beloved ships, and I wanted to showcase that yes, after the October-November update with all the changes to encounters and the balance updates, that 100% the Thrasher Fleet issue can still punch above its weight. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. Basically a Frigate Pilot's Manifesto style deep dive into the Thrasher Fleet issue. We're going to have a look at its stats and attributes, we're going to have a look at different ways to fit it, and then we're going to showcase it in combat toward the end. Now be aware as well that unlike recent content, this is being filmed on the live server. You can see down in the location at the bottom left there are 78 people here in local. This is not the Fulmination test server, this is me using my own ships again on live. So we are going to be having a look at different skills and how those sit in regards to the ships as well. Now anyway, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding the notification bell to never miss an upload, and let me know in the comment section down below what ships you want me to cover in future videos. Of course as well, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so either by joining us on Patreon or by checking out the new merchandise store that we have on Redbubble. We now have 3 different designs available for purchase and new ones are on the way. Special thanks to my beloved wife, incredibly talented artist, coming up with some cool designs for me to showcase new and exciting things. Anyway, do check that out and let me know what you think. If you've got an idea for merchandise as well, let me know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, with all of that said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the Thrasher Fleet issue. The Thrasher is the Minmatar Republic's mainline destroyer hull. If you come up to tech level 3 of the destroyer line, you'll find the first one, the Thrasher, followed by the Thrasher 2 at tech level 4, and at tech level 5 you unlock both the Thrasher Guardian and the Thrasher Fleet issue. And we've covered the Thrasher Guardian elsewhere on this channel, so if you're interested in finding out more about that, go watch that video. I'll see if I can put a link on screen as well if I remember. Let's talk about the Thrasher Fleet issue. Now first and foremost here, you can see that the standard skin for the Thrasher Fleet issue has this strange swampy forest camo look to it. Now obviously when you're using a ship, you're using scanners and signature radius and things like that. Camouflage itself doesn't actually stop, you know, any of that. Ultimately what a ship looks like and things like camouflage aren't going to stop a sensor array. But I just don't get why you would go for a green and brown forest camo for a spaceship. Like, how big are the trees that you're trying to visually hide that in? If you're landing this on a planet and hoping that no one will spot that it's landed, again, how big are the trees that you're trying to hide a 216 meter long ship behind? Like, that needs to be a dense forest of redwoods to even stand a chance, and even then the bark's the wrong colour. But if we have a look at the Halarange skin, I do really like this skin. Obviously, this I mentioned earlier, I sort of jokingly said that's the reason I'm doing this video. I love the orange, I love the black and grey here. It's sort of that mock camo. Yes, I know I'm mocking the ship for having a green and brown camo, but at least grey and black are actually colours in space. Although admittedly, the orange does kind of give it away afterwards. But anyway, very cool looking skin. That is of course the Halarange skin from the Crimson Harvest, which was the 2020 Halloween event. Anyway, enough about how the Thrasher Fleet issue looks, let's talk about how it plays. Like the other Navy issue destroyers, we've got 4 high slots, 3 mid slots, 3 low slots, and 2 of each of the rig types. And as a brief aside, a lot of people, someone mentioned recently in one of the comment sections, why on earth do I call these power grid rigs and mechanical rigs? Where does it actually say that? And I kind of went through the game, looked through the market, looked through the fitting instructions, all that kind of thing, and I could not for the life of me find anywhere that actually refers to this as power grid rigs and mechanical rigs, but I'm certain at some point I made the active decision in my head not to call them combat rigs and engineering rigs because they were called power grid and mechanical, and I cannot find that. If you can work out why I started using that naming convention, do let me know in the comment section down below and put me out of my misery. Otherwise though, from now on, we're referring to that as 2 combat rigs and 2 engineering rigs. Now speaking of power grid, the Thrasher Fleet issue has a power grid output of 49 megawatts. That is actually on the smaller end of things and does cause us problems with fitting, as we'll see later on. Cargo hold capacity, 800 cubic meters. That's a really nice little thing. If, like me, you're used to flying frigates, then having a cargo hold suddenly literally twice, if not 3 times as large as you're used to, is a really nice change. It means I can finish encounters, loot them, and still have space, which is really nice. Now, defensively speaking, the Thrasher fleet issue is on the more fragile end of the fleet issue destroyers, the fleet issues and the navy issues. Most of this is on the shields, 1454 shields, 1294 armor, 1146 on structure, and interestingly as well, as this is Minmatar ship, you do have higher resistances to electromagnetic than other ships, other ship trees would. Here you can see, rather than the usual 0% resistance to electromagnetic on shields, we've got 10%, and on armor we've got 60% electromagnetic rather than the usual 50%. It just means if you're doing Amar anomalies or things like that, you are taking less damage from anything using electromagnetic damage, which is just a nice little note to make there. Speaking of capacitors here, 477 gigajoules with a max capacitor recharge rate of 596. This is actually pretty sizable. It's useful on a destroyer-sized hull. Obviously, our cannons, which the Thrasher fleet issue uses, don't use any capacitor at all, but it gives us enough capacitor here that when we're using things like shield boosters, afterburners, that kind of thing, we do recharge quite quickly, even if we're not capacitor stable, which actually works out really in our favor. Interestingly, the Thrasher fleet issue can lock onto 7 different targets. I think that's actually more targets than I'm trained to be able to lock onto. I don't think I can lock onto the full 7, but I will have to check that later on. But it's worth noting that there's a very wide variety of targets you can lock onto. Again, like if you're used to flying frigates, most frigates can only lock onto 4 or 5 targets, so suddenly coming up to a destroyer that can lock onto 7 can be a nice change, although it just... In fairness, you've got a decent enough scan resolution here of 587 that even if you can only lock onto 5 targets, by the time you've destroyed one, you're able to lock onto the next one long before you need to shoot at it anyway. So it's kind of, it's neither really here nor there. Signature radius, though, 48.3 meters, is low. That is a small signature radius, and it means the Thrasher fleet issue, when combined with that flight velocity of 297 meters per second, which is pretty fast for a destroyer, means we can almost speed tank this thing. It's not a true speed tank against any like frigates, destroyers, and indeed some cruisers. You will still take damage, but it's fast enough and small enough that you can mitigate a lot of the incoming damage. Anyway, let's have a look at the trait descriptions. Now, being a fleet issue or navy issue destroyer, of course we get very similar bonuses to the Catalyst, the Coercer, and the Cormorant navy issue destroyers. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. The Coercer navy issue, the Catalyst navy issue, and the Cormorant navy issue. And that brings me to the point, why is the Thrasher a Thrasher? All of the others start with C's, Catalyst, Cormorant, Coercer. Maybe this should have been the Crasher fleet issue. Anyway, so we've got a roll bonus here, 25% small cannon optimal range. For the others, that's like 25% small railgun or small lasers, but obviously here, being a Minmatar ship, it is cannons, 25% additional small cannon optimal range. We then get a bonus to the small weapon operation, in this case again, cannons, 7.5% increase to small cannon tracking speed, 7.5% increase to small cannon damage. So it's small cannon operation 5, which is a very easy skill to train into, doesn't take long at all. At full cog 3 and combo omega, I think that's about 2 days training to get that from 1 to 5, and you're looking at a full there 37.5% increase to the tracking speed and 37.5% increase to small cannon damage. That's really nice to have. Now, Destroyer Command as well here, same as with the other Navy issue ships, you do get a bonus from Destroyer Command, which if you're flying destroyers, again, is a skill that you should have trained all the way up to 5. 5% additional shield, which makes this tankier, 25% additional shield hit points with that fully trained, makes this a lot tankier. Plus 5% scan resolution, 5% sensor strength, 25% at full training to both of those means you do lock on that little bit faster. So what basically you have here is a versatile hull, definitely geared towards cannons, with a slight increase to optimal range, meaning that your like strike cannons, your long range strike cannons, do get additional range to that. But you also have a bonus to tracking speed, which could, usually would be used towards things like autocannons, the up close and personal short range brawling weapons. So you've kind of got bonuses that affect both sides. I mean, obviously it's nice to have additional tracking speed on strike cannons, and it's nice to have additional optimal range on autocannons, so you can really fit this either way. So we're going to move along in just a moment to having a look at how to fit this. Now, before we showcase the different fits for the Thrasher Fleet issue, I thought it was worth spending a moment just to have a look at relevant skills. I'm not on Fulmination, I don't have 555 in every single skill across the board here. This is the live server, this is my personal account. Obviously, I do have different skills here. Now, this serves the purpose if you're looking at your fit and you're looking at my fit and we've got the same modules, etc., but we're getting different numbers, having seen what skills I have may explain the different discrepancies between things like range or damage, that kind of thing. If I've got more skills or less skills, that kind of thing, it'll explain why we've got those different numbers. Secondarily, it gives us a kind of path almost, a recommended route of train these skills if you're interested in flying a Thrasher Fleet issue. Third as well, there is a juicy little reveal in here that blew the minds of some people in my Discord when I pointed it out the other day. I'd like to have that in video format as well. We'll get to that in just a moment. Starting at the left and working right then, cruising technology, destroyer command. Now, first of all, Destroyer Command as a skill reduces the inertia modifier of your destroyers. That means that you are able to accelerate faster, you decelerate faster, you align quicker, and you're able to maintain tighter orbits. Secondarily as well, you get an increase to destroyer velocity. This means every single one of your destroyers is moving faster. Faster moving destroyers means they're harder to hit. And looking at the Thrasher Fleet issue, we've got a decently high flight velocity and a low signature radius to begin with. This just helps us maintain a better speed tank. On top of this as well, the Thrasher Fleet issue gets direct bonuses from Destroyer Command to the tune of 5% additional shield per level and 5% additional scan resolution. That means you're locking on 25% faster and you've got 25% bigger shields thanks to having Destroyer Command at level 5. Now you'll see that I've actually got Advanced Destroyer Command up to level 4 and I'm currently training towards Advanced Destroyer Command at level 5. This still gives the bonus there of an additional 10% destroyer inertia modifier and additional 10% destroyer velocity. What it doesn't do is affect the ship's bonuses. The Thrasher Fleet issue only gets bonuses from Destroyer Command. It does not get bonuses from Advanced Destroyer Command. That means that 5% shield caps at 25%. If you have a Destroyer Command at level 5 and then Advanced Destroyer Command 1, that's not 30%, that is still 5%. That Destroyer Command does not get bonuses from Advanced Destroyer Command. I just wanted to point that out. Now, talking about flight velocity as well, propulsion systems. If we go on to navigation, the afterburner skill is a very useful one to have as well. Now, the Thrasher Fleet issue doesn't get a direct benefit from this. There's nothing on the Thrasher Fleet issue that says it gains benefits from the afterburner skill, but you do get a better afterburner from it. 20% additional velocity bonus from the afterburner. Just means your afterburners are giving you more speed. Secondarily, you're also reducing the capacitor requirement for an afterburner whilst increasing the time between paying that capacitor requirement. The example I like to give here is imagine that you pay your landlord £500 every 4 weeks for your rent. £500 every 4 weeks. If you're training into afterburner here, you're reducing the amount you pay, so from £500 say you're dropping down to £400, and instead of paying every 4 weeks, because we're increasing the activation time, you now only pay every 5 weeks. So instead of £500 every 4 weeks, you're now paying £400 every 5 weeks, which is actually a massive difference overall. Anyway, as we've said before, as we've already mentioned, the Thrasher Fleet issue not only starts with a fairly sizable shield tank comparative to its other tanks, that is increased by having Destroyer Command, 5% additional shield per level. This means that yes, of course, the Thrasher Fleet issue is going to be a shield tank. Therefore, having levels in shield operation is always going to be useful. Here you can see that this reduces the activation time of your shield boosters. This means that a faster activating shield booster means you are repairing more hit points over a period of time. If for a second you were repairing 100 hit points every 10 seconds and you reduced this to then it's 100 hit points every 9 seconds, you see how over a minute that adds up to a lot more extra hit points. You're then reducing the amount of capacitor required as well to help us maintain capacitor stability. Now, I am going to pause here briefly to mention shield hardening. The fits I showcase don't actually use a shield hardener, either an adaptive invulnerability field or a reactive shield hardener, but you can swap out some of those low slots for extra tank if you really feel you need to. This means shield hardening is worth talking about because, like the afterburner skill, this increases the time between paying the activation costs and reducing the costs of activating these as well, which means you can have a reactive shield hardener or adaptive invulnerability field running for longer without it negatively affecting your capacitor as much, so it's worth keeping an eye on that one. Now, engineering is where things start to get interesting. If we look at destroyer engineering, what this does here is it increases our destroyer's capacity, which means a bigger tank of capacitor, more battery to use, more charge, we can have our systems running for longer. We also get an increase here to power grid for our destroyers. This is a key point. I mentioned earlier that the Thrasher Fleet issue does actually have a problem with its power grid. Leveling destroyer engineering helps alleviate that, not only because, well, mainly because we are increasing the actual total power grid size. This means you can fit better modules. A key difference between looking at something like a Mark III strike cannon or a Gisty C-type strike cannon isn't just the damage it does, but also the amount of power grid it requires. So engineering skills are kind of like the ability to fit better, higher level gear. Higher level gear requires more power grid. Destroyer engineering is how you increase your destroyer's power grid, and that continues through advanced destroyer engineering right the way up to expert destroyer engineering. And interestingly enough, expert destroyer engineering has a really nice little bonus here once you hit expert destroyer engineering 4 and 5. At full level 5 here, not only are you getting all those increases to capacity to the power grid and the amount of a reduction to the amount of warp capacitor that your warp drive uses to jump you out of combat, but you're also getting a reduction to the power grid requirements of small turrets and small missile torpedoes. And this is where the big reveal comes in here. Now, I have Expert Frigate Engineering 5. It was actually the first Expert 5 skill that I trained into because I knew that I wanted this not only for my frigates, but because I was going to move into destroyers. Why does it help? Because yes, it has that small turret power grid need reduction and small missile torpedo power grid need reduction. That's not small turret power grid requirements when fitted to a frigate. That just means small turrets use 10% less power grid. That means strike cannons use 10% less power grid, whether they're being fitted to a frigate, to a destroyer, or whether you're an idiot and fit them to a battleship. They are using less power grid. That means expert frigate engineering here actually helps me fit my destroyers, thanks to me requiring less power grid for my turret systems. Very, very useful. If, like me, you're a frigate main and you're using destroyers as a secondary side thing because, well, they're also using small weapons, now you see why I recommend getting expert frigate engineering up before any of the other expert skills. Now, if we move into electronic systems, you'll see I do have bonuses here to electronic warfare, notably basic electronic warfare to level 5 because of the Nosferatu optimal range and accuracy fall-off. That does come into play later, as we'll see in one of those fits. And target management, as I mentioned as well, I've taken this to basic 5 to get the additional max lock targets. I think that gives me a total of 6. The Thrasher Fleet issue can, of course, lock onto 7 targets. So if I'm finding later, if you check in the combat section, how many targets I'm actually locked onto, if you do want to get the full benefit of having 7 locked targets, that may require going up to advanced target management. We'll check and have a look later. Finally then, we come to the weapon skills, and you'll see I'm actually training these fairly equally across the board here. I've tried to get every single weapon system, every single small weapon system that is, to Operation Advanced 5, so 5 small operation, 5 advanced small operation, 5 small upgrade, 4 advanced small upgrade, and then I have 3 on expert small operation, and that's across the board with like lasers, railguns, cannons, and missiles. Well, missiles doesn't have the 3 in expert yet, but hey, we'll get there. Now, obviously for the Thrasher, we're going to be using cannons, so the relative skills here are Small Cannon Operation 5, Advanced Small Cannon Operation 5, and I've got Expert Small Cannon Operation 3. Now, I'd recommend getting Small Cannon Operation up to 5 first, because the Thrasher Fleet issue gets direct benefit from this skill, not just into what you see on screen here, but also from the ship itself. It has skill bonuses from Small Cannon Operation. For having this at level 5, we're getting Small Cannon Damage plus 20% and Small Cannon Tracking Speed plus 10%. The Thrasher Fleet issue then at full level 5 is getting an additional 37.5% tracking speed and 37.5% additional damage. It's just flat up better cannons across the board. More damage, more tracking speed. Tracking speed, of course, mainly affects the smaller ones, like the autocannons. The closer range ones, sorry, like the autocannons, because they are going to need to be tracking a target faster. Of course, it does benefit strike cannons, but by the time something is really using strike cannons tracking speed, it's kind of already too late. That's where Small Cannon Upgrade comes in. Upgrade is still worth training into. Yeah, the ship doesn't get direct benefits from it, but you still get an increase to small cannon damage. At level 5 it's 15% rather than 20%, but you get additional accuracy fall off and optimal range. This is of a bigger benefit to strike cannons because they get more from it. If you're getting a 15% accuracy fall off, I'd rather have 15% accuracy fall off, or better yet, let's use the optimal range. If you're getting a 10% increase to small cannon optimal range, I'd rather get a 10% increase to 10 kilometers than a 10% increase to 1 kilometer, just because it's a much bigger direct amount. That said though, if I'm going to be using autocannons, I'm not going to say no to having that extra 10% at the 1 kilometer mark. It's still useful, and the accuracy fall off as well means that the autocannon's long and gentle accuracy fall off is still taken into consideration and extended even further by having small cannon upgrade trained. Now you'll also notice, as a quick point here, once you start getting into advanced here, you start looking at things like gyro stabilizer activation time. Gyro stabilizers are obviously the weapon upgrade module for autocannons and strike cannons. Having a gyro stabilizer fitted increases your overall DPS, and activating a gyro stabilizer gives a big boost to DPS for its activation cycle. And they start at, I think it's about 15 seconds. By the time you've trained into this, you've got an additional 2 seconds here for advanced small cannon operation. At expert small cannon operation, you start getting additional gyro stabilizer activation time there for 2 seconds. Same once we go into upgrade. Upgrade starts increasing gyro stabilizer activation time also, but if you do decide that actually you want to start training into medium cannons or large cannons because you want to have cruisers or battle cruisers on the side as well, something else to look into, by the time you start training into advanced medium cannon operation, you also get increases to gyro stabilizer time there. Additional 2 seconds from medium cannon operation, from expert medium cannon operation, advanced medium cannon upgrade, expert medium cannon upgrade, and the same is even true at advanced large cannon operation, etc, etc, etc. This means if, like on Fulmination I've got 555 across the board. That means I've got maximum small cannon, medium cannon, and large cannon. You can theoretically get a full amount of 44 seconds duration on your gyro stabilizers. It's just something to take into consideration if you are looking to also, you've got frigates as your main thing, but you're looking to go into cruisers as well. You might decide that going into cruisers of the same weapon type may be beneficial because those advanced skills and expert skills do also somewhat affect your frigates or your destroyers as well, thanks to that weapon upgrade module also getting a bonus. The first fit that I want to showcase here with the Thrasher Fleet issue is a strike cannon skirmishing fit. I'm reluctant to call it a kiting fit because we're ultimately going to be taking it into higher tier encounters. Those outrange these guns, so it's not true kiting. That said, if you're in lower tier anomalies, or indeed if you're in PvP, yes, this is kind of a kiting fit because you are outranging your opponents when they are other smaller ships, as we'll see in a moment. Now, the idea behind this is we're leaning into that roll bonus. Basically, if we're getting additional 25% small cannon optimal range, I would rather get 25% of 10 kilometers than I would get 25% of 1 kilometer. Well, you've got a difference there between 0.25 kilometers from the autocannons or 2.5 kilometers extra from the strike cannons. It's just a bigger bonus. So if we lean into that here, I've gone for a full brace of Republic Fleet smaller strike cannons. Now you'll see that these have an optimal range of 11.67 kilometers with an accuracy fall-off of 10.68. This means if we're sitting at 20 kilometers, we are more than 50% effective, and if we can actually be hitting all the way out at 30. Now, if you're in lower tier anomalies up against frigates and destroyers, etc., that's probably outranging most of them, and it is a decent whack of damage. If you have a look at the strike cannons themselves, you'll see their damage profile is mainly thermal and explosive with a bit of kinetic in the middle. Those are actually pretty high numbers. What drags a strike cannon's DPS down is its activation time. They're very slow to fire, or relatively speaking. For small turrets, they're relatively slow to fire, and for small turrets they also have a very low tracking speed. I've been doing a lot of content recently with battleships and battle cruisers, so honestly looking at 183 as a tracking speed seems astonishingly fast, but for small turrets 183 is very slow. By the time something gets into a close orbit around you, like a interceptor or something like that, the strike cannons will struggle to hit that kind of thing. But the idea is then obviously you kill them before they get into range, or you slow them down with things like your Scrambler and your Webifier, which of course are our two first mid slots to have a look at here. I've gone for a Republic Fleet Warp Scrambler. Are you seeing a theme here? It's a lot of Republic Fleet gear. I've tried to go for meta level 6 gear across the board here, just to showcase this on a fairly cheap fit. Obviously I know Warp Scramblers are still fairly expensive, but hey. Republic Fleet Warp Scrambler, I've got one of these fitted here. It doesn't need to be a Republic Fleet, it can honestly be a Mark 5 or whatever at this point, because it's not the Warp Jammer strength we're worried about so much as just the ability to switch off micro warp drives. If an enemy ship is using a micro warp drive in an encounter, this switches it off. It drops them from whatever insane speed they're at down to their standard flight velocity, at which point they're much easier to hit. Now, whether they had a micro warp drive that you've switched off with a Scrambler, or if they were just using an afterburner, or heck, if they're just a ship flying around, the Stasis Webifier here, again, a Republic fleet, drops their flight velocity down by a further 59%. That's a big drop, slows them right the heck down. Your strike cannons now hit them quite comfortably. Ideally though, we do want to be able to hit our targets and kill them before they get too close, and a target painter is one way of helping us do that. Guide target painter here, meta level 5, we're looking at a signature radius adjustment of 29%. We do that from 33.7 kilometers. That is obviously the kind of range we don't want to be firing before a target really hits 33.75 anyway, because we're going to be missing. Essentially, you make them a bigger target, that means you're more likely to get strong hits on them as they approach, and as they get close, you can then hit the Warp Scrambler and the Webifier, leave the target painter on them, and absolutely blap them off the grid fairly quickly. Now, to help this in the low slots here, I've gone for a Republic Fleet Small Afterburner. This allows us to help control our range, and we are going to be sitting at a further range of, as said, about 11 kilometers orbit, usually, and sometimes up from there as well. This ultimately flight velocity adjustment, 165%, just allows us to move back and forward that little bit faster. If we've got something small and quick coming for us, like an interceptor, you can turn around, run directly away from it, keep the angular velocity at 0, and hopefully just buy yourself a few extra seconds, which might be another shot or two at that target before it gets too close. Now, you can go for a micro warp drive here. I'm not a big fan of fitting a micro warp drive here on the Thrasher Fleet issue, because the signature radius bloom is appalling, and it really does screw with the capacitor. The fact that fitting a micro warp drive knocks 25% off the top of your capacitor really hurts. I much prefer an afterburner. Now, because this is a shield tank, a Republic Fleet Small Shield Booster fits in here, allows us to repair any damage that we do take. You'll see that we do take quite a bit of damage early on in an encounter as we're getting into position. This just helps maintain those shields for a little bit longer and helps top them up. Now, the third mid slot I've gone for is a Republic Fleet Gyro Stabilizer. This is the weapon upgrade module, as I mentioned earlier. We get an increase to damage bonus and a reduction to activation time adjustment just for having this fitted, and you can activate it, in this case, thanks to my skills, 23 seconds I can activate this for an additional 8.24% damage bonus, whilst dropping the activation time by a further 400%. It's a huge amount of DPS that you get from having this activated. If you're finding that you're not quite as tanky as you'd like though, you can swap out the Gyro Stabilizer for an adaptive invulnerability field. As I mentioned with the shield hardening skill earlier, that is a very viable thing to do and makes you just that little bit more tanky. Now, the rigs that I'm using for this, I've kept things really cheap here, as you can see. A Cannon Burst Aerator 1 and a Cannon Collision Accelerator 1. The main purpose for the Collision Accelerator, not going for 2 Burst Aerators here, is because we're using strike cannons. That alpha damage is just as important. Sometimes you can destroy something in one hit, at which point Burst Aerators don't help. Cannon Collision Accelerators give less DPS overall. Obviously, 2 Burst Aerators is a bigger increase in DPS than a Burst Aerator and a Cannon Collision Accelerator. Not by much, but it is a bigger boost. The reason I go for a Collision Accelerator alongside a Burst Aerator is because sometimes that little bit of extra damage is enough to one-shot a ship off the grid, at which point it's 1 shot to kill rather than 2 shots. And 2 shots that are faster is never going to be as fast as 1 shot. Now, on the other side of things, in the engineering rigs, I've gone for an auxiliary power grid router and an ancillary power grid router. This is because strike cannons are so ridiculously power grid hungry, and we can kind of actually see this here, where I talked about how frigate engineering helps. If you see, 9.9 megawatts here is the power grid requirement for a Republic Fleet small strike cannon. And if I open up the grid here normally and showcase this as it is in a standard fitting, not applied to the ship, they normally have a power grid requirement of 11 megawatts. There is your proof that the expert frigate engineering skill is reducing the power grid of the Republic Fleet small strike cannon by 10%. 11, obviously 10% of 11 is 1.1, 11 minus 1.1 is the fully fitted on here, 9.9. That's your proof that it works there. Let's showcase this in action by jumping into a Tier 7 Angel small anomaly. Sticking with a small just to keep things nice and simple, and here we come. Obviously I've cleared a couple of the first waves just to check this. We're jumping in, this is the first part of Wave 2, so we are going to lock onto all targets here. You'll see I did get a couple of shots off at the Bellicose before warping out. I am going to go after the Gisty Talwar first of all. You see I take a little bit of damage, so it's time to activate that shield booster. We're going to start an orbit, which I've set to 10 kilometers. 10, 11 kilometers is about where we want to be, but if we're a little bit further out, it doesn't matter too much because of that slow, gradual fall-off, courtesy of strike cannons. One of the best things about strike cannons is how gentle that accuracy fall-off there is. 10.68 kilometers means once we're in 30 kilometers we can start to hit. At 20 kilometers we are under 50, well, we are better than 50% effective. Now that we're at the sort of the 12 kilometer, 11 kilometer mark, we're going to be striking for full damage, and you can see that now we're sort of in that range and starting to actually orbit. We take a lot less damage. Now, interestingly enough, this Bellicose Covert Ops, you can see there, I'm sure you can see on screen, how quickly that is moving. I'm going to put on there the Warp Scrambler and the Stasis Web of Fire. I think that's using a micro warp drive, and sure enough, it has slowed the hell down. So yeah, it was using a micro warp drive. I definitely feel validated now for bringing a Warp Scrambler in order to deal with that. And you can see I've slowed it right the way down with through the shields into the armor now. Still taking a little bit of damage. We're not a capacitor stable build here with the strike cannons, so I do just want to kind of leave myself to take a little bit of damage, and we'll activate the shield booster as sort of needed, as and when. One or two activations here and there just to boost our. Actually, let's go a couple more just to take us back over 90%. There we are, 93%, that's plenty. And we're not taking hardly any damage. You can actually do higher than Tech Level 7, but I just wanted to showcase, I know a lot of people, I said Tech Level 7 before, in the previous Thrasher Fleet issue video that you could do Tech 7 anomalies. A lot of people have asked, what about now that we've had the changes to how encounters work? So here we are, Tech 7 encounter, Tech 7 anomaly, still using the Thrasher Fleet issue, similar setup, meta level 6, fairly cheap to fit. And we're doing this quite comfortably, you know, taking a small amount of damage here and there, nothing the shield booster can't keep up with. Gyro Stabilizer helps us kick out a little bit of extra damage, and that Bellicose is going to go down in our next hit, I think. So we're going to start to orbit that Gisty Talwar to get into range of bat and start striking on that. Now, the Talwar being a smaller target, I'm also going to activate the Target Painter just to bloom its signature radius, make sure that I'm able to do absolute maximum damage per hit there. And away we go. Now, I haven't tested this in Tech 8 anomalies, in honesty, but I cannot imagine for the life of me that we would struggle in a Tech 8. I mean, you can see how sedate, how straightforward and non-threatening a Tech 7 is. It doesn't get much tougher as you hit Tech Level 8. And certainly, I know this can definitely do mediums, and it can do larges. Just unfortunately, the mediums and larges in this system were occupied by other players, and they're friendly players, so I didn't want to bully them out for the sake of it. Just to showcase, though, nice and straightforward here as we pull down that Talwar. We're then going to start moving on to this Scythe, I think, next. Being a logistics cruiser, I'd rather deal with that then start to deal with the others. So we're going to set off an orbit there, because we know we can finish that Talwar off from the distance, even as we move outside of its optimal range. There we are, on to the Scythe next. Probably don't need the E-War modules in the middle there, because we're now dealing with a cruiser-sized target that's not using a micro-warp drive or an afterburner. We can just happily now orbit this at that 11-kilometer range and hit it comfortably. 700, 800 damage a pop, every activation there. It's a good amount of damage, and takes them down nice, and you know, it's still fairly quickly. It's not going to be as fast as the autocannons, obviously, but it's a nice sedate range, and we've got time with an autocannon build. with a strike cannon build, you've got time if anyone else lands on grid. If you see someone land on grid, chances are they're outside of your range because they've probably warped in at 0 or they've warped in at 100. So they're either massively far out of the centre or they're right in the centre, at which point you're orbiting away from centre. You can move to safety, warp out of there that little bit faster. Heck, you can even lock on, change target and take him out if needs be. Anyway, I think that showcases the strike cannon build quite nicely. I left the shield booster running a bit long there, so I have lost quite a bit of capacitor. We are going to let that now just recharge here in the background. I'm so guilty of this, and I know a lot of you guys in the comment section have shown support for this as well, the concept of accidentally leaving a shield booster running for entirely too long. And I do like the idea that if you're at 100% shield with a shield booster active and it activates for say 2 cycles and you've been at 100% for both of those, it should play a sound just to say you're wasting your shield booster. I don't know, maybe I'll suggest that to the developers. Maybe you guys should get onto the official Eve Echoes Discord, jump into the suggestions channel and make that one on there. An unnecessary shield booster activation siren. That would be nice, it would certainly get me to switch the darn things off. The second fit that I want to showcase is of course a Captain Benzie special up close and personal autocannon brawling fit. Now the reason we've gone for this is to lean into those skill bonuses here from small cannon operation. Like we talked about with the roll bonus of the optimal range bonus, I'd rather get 25% of 10 kilometers than 25% of 1 kilometer. Same goes here for the small cannon operation. I'd rather get an additional 37.5% tracking speed to a larger amount than the smaller amount, and I'd rather get a bigger bonus to damage. Basically, what I'm trying to say is here is if we apply these to the autocannons, the base stats of the autocannons are higher, so the total gain from that percentage is higher across the board too. This means, yes, Republic Fleet small autocannons, we're keeping with that theme here of meta level 6 across the board in order to showcase this fairly between the two, and you'll see that we've got a DPS here of 286.5, so it's a considerable increase in DPS. Now, the downside to this is that autocannons do have a very short optimal range of 1.74 kilometers. You're only getting that full 286 DPS at 1.74 kilometers. Anything beyond that, and yeah, you're getting less than the DPS screen actually shows, so do take that total DPS stat with a pinch of salt. That said, the accuracy fall off here of 6.3 kilometers is so slow and gradual that it takes us all the way to 8 kilometers before we hit 50%. At which point 50% of 286 is still 143.25. Ultimately, that is still a very good amount of DPS and not much shy of what the strike cannons had, and that's if we're sitting at 8 kilometers. The idea here is that we're actually going to be sitting at closer to the 3 or 4 kilometer mark, preferably as close to 1.74 as we can to get that maximum benefit. At that range, it's only tracking speed that matters on whether or not we hit a target, and you'll see that our tracking speed of 687 is insanely high. That means we're not really going to struggle to hit anything as long as we're in range of it. But, just to be sure, in our mid slots, we've gone for a Warp Scrambler, which I will load up here once my fat thumb can get the right thing. Republic Fleet Warp Scrambler, same as we had before, is there mainly to switch off micro warp drives, and we've got a Stasis Webifier. Now, the reason for the Stasis Webifier at this point, ultimately, is just to screen away drones. If I'm in PvP and someone launches a drone at me, I can hit that Stasis Webifier, drop the drone to a slower speed than I'm already moving myself, and I can keep it there for at least 13.6 kilometers away, which means the drone is not capable of doing much damage. In PvE, it's still useful because it means you can absolutely slow a target right the way down, your autocannons are just not going to struggle at all, and you're able to maximize your damage output against whatever target you're shooting at. You can theoretically swap the Stasis Webifier out for something like a neutralizer, or heck, another Warp Scrambler if you're going into PvP and really want to lock your target into position, but for me, I quite like the versatility there of the Webifier. Now, the one thing where I've broken the rule here on having meta level 6 gear was because I couldn't bear to bring myself to fit an Imperial Navy module onto a Thrasher Fleet issue. It just felt wrong having a Mar Navy gear on a Thrasher Fleet issue. But hey, there we are. So for the small energy Nosferatu here, I've gone for, and now please, hopefully I get this right this time, a Vrykolakas Small Energy Nosferatu. Apparently that word, I'm not going to try and pronounce it again, is Greek for vampire, and I'm sure someone can give a better pronunciation of it. I've tried to pronounce that to the best of my ability, but I learned something new there. I can't remember who it was who shouted, who shouted that out in the comment section below. Awesome, thank you for pointing that out. It means vampire in Greek, which makes complete sense when you realise we're talking about an Energy Nosferatu. This, of course, helps us maintain capacitor stability, and we're going to be close enough to be always using that within its optimal range. Anyway, that optimal range there is, of course, 5.52 kilometers. That is thanks to me having bonuses in the electronic warfare skill, giving an increase there to the optimal range. Means that it's always going to be within range, keeping us capacitor stable. Low slots are otherwise the same: Republic Fleet Small Shield Booster, Republic Fleet Gyro Stabilizer, and Republic Fleet Small Afterburner. The main purpose for this is, simply put, there's no need to change any of those. You can, again, theoretically swap out the Gyro Stabilizer for something like an Adaptive Invulnerability Field, if you find that tankiness is just not quite where you want it to be, but for me, I prefer that extra kick of damage, and we are using the exact same rigs as last time. I haven't changed them because I'm not made of money, but theoretically, if you're going for the autocannon build, it is better to swap the Cannon Collision Accelerator out for a second burst aerator. And you'll see that I've kept with level 1 rigs here to keep things nice and cheap across the board, but obviously if you do have the money, take that all the way up to something like a Cannon Collision 3 or Burst Aerator 3 or whatever the heck you happen to have lying around, or whatever you can afford. You'll see though I'm able to do Tech 7 anomalies using these builds here, and we're going to have a look at that in action now. This time around, we're jumping into another Tech 7 Angel Small Anomaly. We're here right at the start. This is the first wave with the autocannon Brawling build. So you can see we've got the autocannons fitted. These, if you remember, have an optimal range of about 1.7 kilometers, so we do need to get close. You can see I've set the auto orbit here, so the orbit when I just tap orbit, to 3 kilometers. We're a little bit far out, and that means we're going to have a fairly direct approach. You'll see I've double tapped into space so that we're not going in a perfectly straight line. We are approaching at an angle, which gives us a bit of angular velocity, makes us harder to hit target as we move in towards this Gistum site. It's quite a way away, and so screw it, let's go after this Bellicose instead, because we're practically in range already. We can activate the Nosferatu, we've got the shield booster running, we've got the afterburner running. Let's add the gyro stabilizer there to the mix, 60% capacitor. But you'll see that things are now beginning to stabilize with the capacitor thanks to the Nosferatu draining out of that Bellicose, and we're doing good damage per activation. Yeah, okay, it's not quite the 800 damage per shot we had of the strike cannons, but you'll see in some cases 600 damage per activation, and we're activating in half the time there of the strike cannons, plus we're still hitting sometimes 500, 600 damage. Taking quite a bit of damage at this point in time. This is mainly due to the fact that I'm not killing this covert ops quite as quickly as I'd like, and it is giving a signature radius bloom, but it's also due to the fact that I did come in at an incorrect angle. I came in on a little bit too tight of an approach there, and you'll see that now that I've got that Bellicose slowed down, it's a Bellicose covert ops, and it was using a micro warp drive, as evidenced by the fact that it slowed right down the second that I put on a scrambler. You'll see that I'm now doing much better damage to it. I'm orbiting at a faster speed. That means I'm taking less damage, and things are still nice and capacitor stable as I've brought my shields back under control. Anyway, that Bellicose looks like it's about to go down. It is a fair bit of time though. We've got 34 kilometers before our next targets. Oh, it's a fair way to go, so let's get on to that. I'm going to double tap in space rather than use a direct approach this time. That gives me that angular velocity, which means any shots coming in, as you can see, are taking a little bit less damage. They're just less likely to hit me because I'm not coming in a straight line. I am maintaining an angular velocity. I'm moving across their vision, harder to hit target. Just obviously still a long way to go. Even with an afterburner, 801 meters per second. Goodness, I've been spoiled with faction frigates. The 801 meters per second feels like a slow-moving ship. But there we go. I'm a little bit of a speed freak, I think. I do enjoy the Thrasher Fleet issue. It's certainly one of the faster destroyers out there. I would like to see destroyers get a slight speed increase, though, if I'm honest, or possibly an extra high slot each. I think a Thrasher Fleet issue really should have 5 high slots and extra power grid to compensate, but hey, maybe that's just me. That's another topic for another video. Gistum Scythe now in range there, 3 kilometers. We've got the turrets active, doing their job quite nicely there. The Nosferatu is back on form. That's going to start refilling our capacitor. Gyro Stabilizer giving that additional DPS and damage there, and we're ripping through that side's shields. It's all the way down into armor already. Not long at all to get down to that point. 1,200 damage there from some of these hits. That's quite a big strike from an autocannon. But there we are, 645. It's a bit of a mixed bag. You get some really high shots, some really low shots. Most of them seem to be around the 400 to 600 mark. And since it's doing that every 3.5 seconds, that is a lot of damage that this thing is kicking out. You can see that scythe now halfway through its structure, and we're then going to be moving on probably to that hurricane next, just because it's sitting right there. So yep, one hit to go. Let's get off the scythe on to the hurricane and see how quickly we start to pull this down, because obviously the Hurricane is a battle cruiser. Yes, it's only a prototype, but still, that's a Tech 7 battle cruiser. Let's see how much damage we start doing as we get close to that optimal range. Even then, the shields are going down pretty quickly. Oh, we've got some friends jumping into system. Will they join me in this fight, or are they going to move on to the next anomaly? Our Corporation and Alliance does suggest that if someone is in an encounter, if you jump into an encounter and you find someone there, it is polite to ask their permission before you start firing. Some people just go, okay, well, there's someone in this one, and they jump off to the next one. Have a wave of people soloing all the different ones. It's a great way to help you find, start spawning things like dead spaces, scouts, and Inquisitor anomalies. But anyway, we're here to talk about the Thrasher Fleet issue, not about spawning different special anomalies. You can see the Hurricane was still in its shields. Again, it is a battle cruiser. Don't be turned down by the fact here that a battle cruiser is taking time to get through its shields. That is a shield tank battle cruiser taking time to get through there. And there we go. We are through shields into armor. We're going to start ripping through that armor and get it down to structure. And you can see here, once again, I'm leaving the shield booster going entirely too long, but screw it, we're capacitor stable, so I may as well. I can just pretend that that's intentional, and we'll just leave that running now. Oh, I took some damage there. That's why I've got the shield booster still going to instantly repair that damage. 80% capacitor, though, with shield booster active, with me using the gyro stabilizer almost immediately off cooldown each time, and with the afterburner going, and we're kicking out decent damage. And with the tracking speed on this thing, again, if anyone jumps in here with an interceptor or another destroyer or another frigate and decides that they want to try and PvP me, I can probably lock onto them quite comfortably, slow them down with the scrambler and the weatherfire, and take them out before they can take me out. Anyway, folks, that does wrap up everything I wanted to say then about the Thrasher Fleet issue. Yes, okay, this was just a sneaky way of me showing off the Halorange skin. Love how this ship looks. It's such a cool looking ship, even without this skin. With this skin, it just looks amazing. Definitely my favourite destroyer, definitely one of my favourite ships in EVE Echoes, and 100% I know a lot of you have asked, would I do a destroyer pilot's manifesto like I've done the frigate pilot manifesto? The answer is maybe. If it's something that people want, it's something I will consider doing, and certainly I need to do a video talking about what I think destroyers need and how we can change things up there and possibly get destroyers out of the niche that they're in. They're not bad. As a hull size, they're not a bad thing to go for, but certainly there's some work to be done to bring them up to the standards of the others. And as you can see here, Tech Level 5 Destroyer, very cheaply fitted, doing Tech 7 encounters, Tech 7 anomalies, Tech 7 content, is what I'm trying to say there. Definitely viable ships, great fun to use, and I understand why a lot of people refer to the Thrasher as Air Benzie. It's become a bit of a meme, but hey, there we go. Anyway, folks, let me know your thoughts and opinions on the Thrasher Fleet issue, on the Thrasher, on destroyers in general, in fact, in the comment section down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching right the way to the end of this one. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.